WBUR Podcasts, Boston.
I'm Daryl C. Murphy, and you're listening to The Common. Amelia.
Hi, Daryl.
Hey.
What's up?
So we're talking to you Tuesday morning around 9:30, and I understand you have a developing story for us. It's about the closure of the Sound Museum in Brighton. It's kind of an institution in the Boston music community. Here's a clip from a group called Hawthorne who recorded their 2019 Tiny Desk Contest submission in the space. All right, Amelia, for folks who don't know about this space, what is the Sound Museum?
Yes, the Sound Museum is a large rehearsal complex in Brighton that serves a lot of musicians who use it for practice space, store their gear, and sometimes record music there.
Okay. So, Amelia, tell me what's going on with this coming closure.
Yeah, we found out about a year ago that the developer who had bought the building that the Sound Museum is in was planning to demolish it and build a life sciences building. And so ultimately, it was apparent that everybody who used this space would have to leave at some point.
And since the notice of this closure, what has happened?
Well, there was a lot of noise made. People were pretty mad. It's been around for a long time. The Sound Museum has been in that spot about 30 years, and it's existed in some form for like 40. So initially, the developer, which is called IQHQ, they said, hey, we'll help. We want this development to go through. We want the city to approve this, so we'll help the Sound Museum, which is a business. We'll help them find another spot to rent, and we will pay to renovate it to make it useful, and they can continue their business. At some point, that offer changed. They still had to show that they would help musicians, but instead they offered to donate a building to the city to turn into a rehearsal space, which for the musicians may turn out to be helpful in the same way, but it does mean that the people who own the Sound Museum, it's a couple, Catherine and Bill Desmond, their business doesn't have any assistance anymore. Though I should mention the latest news on this, which we found out in December right before Christmas, all the musicians found out they had to leave at the end of January, which was kind of unexpected. Actually very unexpected, because the developer had said, we're not going to ask people to leave until there's like a place for them to go. And currently there is nowhere yet for them to go. So people were pretty freaked out.
So they're just kind of asked out.
Yeah. I mean, the Sound Museum itself has nowhere currently to bring its business to, and the musicians don't yet have even a temporary space. There is a coalition that's working on some temporary space in Dorchester, and they're hoping to make that happen in within 6 weeks or so. But that's not quite a done deal yet.
Let's step back real quick. Tell me about the people who use the space. Are these, bands that we would know of? Are they like super indie bands, I
mean, it varies. Hobbyists, professionals, but it does serve a lot of people. So I talked to one musician who 2 of his bands use the same practice space. They all share rent on it. It makes it really cheap for them. So a lot of the rooms in the Sound Museum are like that. Multiple bands use them. Mm-hmm. So, these are folks who are pretty underground and indie, a lot of them. But there have certainly been bands that tour and, make some sort of at least partial living who use it. And yeah, they've kind of gotten an affordable rate because the Sound Museum is kind of scrappy in DIY.
Is this situation here part of a trend that you're seeing?
Yes, definitely. I mean, people are really worried that there's just not enough practice space. You can't take your band into your living room and play. I mean, it's the noise is an issue. Yeah, the Sound Museum is in this big building. It's not going to disrupt anybody. If you walk through those halls, I mean, you'll hear a billion bands banging away, but they're not bothering the neighbors. And, we just found out that the Charlestown rehearsal studios are going to close for musicians. They have to be out in June. So there's some uproar of that. A few years ago, there was a space called EMF in Cambridge that was really similar to the Sound Museum that also closed because a developer wanted to do something with that spot. So yeah, it is a trend, and there just isn't a lot of kind of like empty space around that's affordable for people to just like bring in their drum kit and guitar and start playing. I mean, it's just not a thing anymore. It's getting gobbled up, biotech, various development and things like that.
Yeah, tell me about just the business of running a music rehearsal space.
Yeah, I mean, I think the reason places like the Sound Museum have lasted for so long is because they kind of do have small margins. They don't put tons and tons of money into these buildings. They keep them up. They're responsible for coordinating with the bands and stuff and collecting rent, and also sometimes letting them slide on rent if they can't afford it. You know, the Sound Museum certainly was one of those places. It's a small business. It's owned by a couple, but it's sort of an institution in that way. And I think as these sort of older industrial buildings fall by the wayside, they're ripe opportunities for developers, right? And biotech is huge in Boston, and I think Boston wants it here. So they're kind of trying to have it both ways, and I think to some degree it's like, we want to allow these biotech developments to happen, but we're going to try to get the developers to, give us something in return so that, like, maybe we don't totally destroy the music community. Hence this offer of donating a building on the developer's part to the city to turn into a rehearsal space. But it's not the same as, preserving what's already there.
We're going to take a quick break, but we'll be right back with more from Amelia.
Did you kill Marlene Johnson?
I think you're one of the first people to have actually asked.
From WBUR and ZSP Media, this is Beyond All Repair, a new podcast about an unsolved murder that will leave you questioning everything.
Somebody should be in jail for murdering my sister.
A woman who's never been believed.
As long as they think I have done this, then they're not looking for who actually did this.
And that's what makes it a cold case.
No, it's a botched case.
And a search for the truth, once and for all.
Wow, it just gets more interesting.
Beyond All Repair. Listen and follow wherever you get your podcasts.
Be careful. You're digging in a place that's been very peaceful for a while.
Do it anyway. Dig.
And we're back. As you're talking about it and we're going through the story, I'm hearing not just the loss of a rehearsal space, but the loss of a community of sorts. Because, when you have a bunch of musicians all in the same building together, that could lead to collaborations. And then when you have a cool landlord who's kind of understanding and flexible, that helps to facilitate things. What does this mean for the Boston music scene? How big of a loss is this?
Yeah, I mean, it is hard to quantify. I think it's immediately a loss for a lot of individual people who share this space. And that is also hard to quantify because it's just hard to count them, But I think there's a real concern that, like, sort of the indie underground DIY scene is already, like, really being driven out. It's so unaffordable here. Allston-Brighton, which used to be sort of the epicenter of this, is less and less looking like a cool indie, like, part of the city where, like, underground bands play. There aren't as many clubs anymore. There have been, Great Scott, which was a huge favorite, the latest loss over the pandemic. People still bring that up, and it was a few years ago at this point. But everybody's still feeling that. I think this sort of represents the possibility of, like, maybe the identity of Allston-Brighton as, Allston Rock City. Maybe that's not true anymore. And also, like, maybe musicians can't really afford to live and work here.
Yeah, I mean, I live in Allston, and Rock City didn't come to mind when I...
What comes to mind?
College kids.
Well, that helps. I do think the college kids are keeping it alive. They do, to some degree, they do like to form bands. Yeah. And they'll find places to play. It sounds like it hasn't, at least in your view, hasn't completely flipped over to, like, biotech central yet. It's not like Kendall Square.
Not quite yet. So tell me what's next for the folks at Sound Museum?
Well, I do think that there's a possibility some of them will get to use a temporary space that's being put together. will be operated by the nonprofit, their record company. So, and that's in Dorchester. So there may be some holdover. If people can use it, if that is a spot that works for them, there might be somewhere for people to go, hopefully. That's still in the works.
Right.
I think the other thing to watch, of course, is this development. You know, it's under review by the city.
Yeah, tell me exactly what they plan to put there.
A lot of labs.
And that sounds like something the city would probably want to get behind.
I think so. I think that's why they're working so hard to find something that will make everyone happy, which so far they haven't.
Yeah.
The Sound Museum, the owners are not happy because they thought they were going to get help moving, and instead IQHQ is donating a building to the city. I think the Mayor's Office of Arts and Culture, you know, their mandate is to help musicians. You know, is it to help small businesses? Arguably, I don't know. Like, they want to make sure people stay in the city and are able to practice there, and that's like kind of the bottom line for them. But I think there's an argument to be made for small businesses like the Sound Museum. I think they've had a big place in the community for a long time. So I understand why a lot of people are very upset about that, not just the people who own the Sound Museum.
Yeah. It would suck if you have all this biotech and life science development, but your music scene sucks.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is the thing about, like, it changes the character of the city. I think for me, that's what I've been thinking a lot about, which is like, okay, even if you can, like, extract this incredible donation from a developer like IQHQ, an entire building that the city could manage, which would mean that they can't be displaced, supposedly, right? Like, that it would be like a long-term solution. What will that look like? And you're still building this huge life sciences campus, whatever that means, which isn't like the same at all to like this sort of like grungy old building where lots of weird indie artists hang out and play music.
Sounds messy.
I mean, yeah. Today someone asked me, like, on a scale of like 1 to 10, how messy is this? And I was like, it's an 11. It's gonna get messier.
Well, with that, thank you for coming through and bringing some sort of clarity.
I don't know if I did. I think I just made everybody more confused. But, you know, you're welcome.
That's WBUR arts and culture reporter and critic, Amelia Mason. And that's our show for today. Thank you so much for listening to The Common. Please hit us up on Instagram or Twitter at WBUR The Common, or send us an email at thecommon@wbur.org. I'm Daryl C. Murphy, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.